So welcome back to the Success Blueprint. Me, Jason, we have our adorable friends, Max and Summer. And we are going over some frequently asked questions that we get, especially from our first-time home buyers. And hopefully we can have some good discussion and answer some questions. So anyway, welcome, you two.
Thank you.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And so, Jace, where should we start?
Let's start with just some of the questions that we get asked. Let's just, I think so many times home buyers come in and they just really don't have they don't have a clue where to start. And I think there's a lot of people out there that don't even reach out to an agent because they're like, oh, is that my first step, or is something else my first step, or what is? And so maybe even just start with that. Like if somebody's thinking about it, maybe they're not even serious about doing it right now, but they're just thinking about it, maybe doing it in the next year or two. What should they do? Where should they start?
So, Summer, if there is a first-time home buyer and they are just curious about buying a home, how should they proceed? How should they start?
Well, I always recommend they just get in touch with a lender. Like that's the first thing. So I just did this with my little sister. She's 21. Still in college, but has a good down payment available, is in a position where she doesn't want to buy right now, but she knows she wants to in the next year or two. So I connected her with a good lender and I said, just talk to them, see where you're at. Let's set some goals with him before we take any further steps. So now she has like a real clear cut plan on what she's going to do in order to get a house in the next year and a half. So that's
awesome.
That's typically what I like to recommend.
So how important is it to get a good lender versus just any lender?
Oh, that's a make or break. You got to do that.
$1 million question.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, obviously I always recommend a local lender, preferably one that's reputable. But yeah, sometimes when you get those bigger ones that are, national, it's really hard to get a hold of anybody. They're not as efficient, less personable. It's just kind of a mess.
So real fast, where would they find a good lender? How do they find a good lender?
Well, I mean, obviously I would say call your favorite real estate agent and ask them, which would be me. Sorry, Max. I'm just kidding.
She's a lot more fun than me, so I get it.
But yeah, I think asking another professional in the business would be the best way to start because we've seen it all. So,
Got it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Just call an agent. Call us, whatever we have. I mean, we can let you know. We can point you in the right direction. We can set you up with, if you are thinking about the next year, we can kind of show you what's available now. I mean, those homes aren't probably going to be available then, but we can start that process, right? Just so at least they know what to even start with, right?
And I think with every other big purchase that you make in your life or any other big decision that you make, you're usually planning years in advance for that big decision, or at least a year, right? And so a lot of people, I'm shocked at how many people just jump into buying a home and they just do it and they're done, and then they make a few mistakes along the way, or there's things that they could have done better, or be better prepared for those situations. And so I don't think you can ever get too ahead of the game of just planning by talking with a lender, talking with a real estate agent, and just getting an idea. Even if you're a few years out, at least you can kind of know exactly, okay, how much out of pocket is this going to cost me? Where is this going to be at? What does the market look like? What's the market going to look like a year from now? So in that way you can thoroughly think through things and make an educated decision when it comes to buying your first home.
So when you talk about making mistakes, I like that you bring that up because when you, I feel like lenders, from us doing it for so long, we vet a lot of lenders, right? So we know a lot of lenders that maybe like costs or different things. We see a lot of, the process, but then the end game of where it can cost. So when you talk about making a mistake on a 30-year mortgage may not be the one that you want to make it on, right? And so it can cost you monthly when it shouldn't, and it doesn't have to by using, the correct people and building a good real estate team.
Well, and not even with the lending too, like what Max said, some people will just jump into it and it's not even the lending. Sometimes it's the house and it's a poor location or has big issues and they're just too excited to get into something instead of just being patient and waiting for the right one to come along and not getting in over your head.
And that's honestly, I can speak to that from experience because that's how me and my wife were when we first bought our house. We were living down in Salt Lake. I was working down there. We started to make some okay money. And so we're like, okay, next step, buy a house. You know, that's the next thing on everybody's list. And we probably jumped in a little too quick and got a little too excited where we ended up pulling the trigger on something that there were probably some better decisions that were out there, better options that were out there. And if we would have just taken that time to just plan, sit down in advance, then we could have been a little bit more logical versus just purely emotional in that situation.
When you plan a little bit better for the end game, what I like to do or what I recommend is by holding on to that first home as a rental, right? So if you plan for that concept going into it, then you know that this is, we want it to be in this sort of condition, this part of town, this. So then when you move on, you can still use it as a rental instead of having that project that you wish that you didn't have or that you need to unload because of that.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think it just goes back to knowing a good real estate agent, because we all know probably 10 to 15 agents. At least I knew a ton of real estate agents before I was even in real estate. And it's just so important to be able to make sure that you reach out to those who are doing a lot of transactions, because then they are going to be a lot more educated on where the market's at and be able to better guide you and help you versus just a friend that you want to use them because you like them. They may not always provide the quality of service that a professional real estate agent who's doing it every single day, doing a lot of transactions, may be able to provide to you.
Right.
Yeah. And on that note, that is one conversation I have with every first-time home buyer is, what's your goal with this? Like, obviously I want to convince you to keep that first house as an investment long-term. And so that's something I always discuss with a first-time home buyer, because a lot of times I've found that they haven't even thought about it. Like it's a brand new concept to them that they could possibly keep it as a rental eventually. So then it shifts their outlook on it too. Like you said, like, is it in a good location? Is it a good layout? Is it a good home for a potential rental down the road? So I think, like Max said, just getting someone with experience who can think a little bit more outside the box instead of, I just want to get a house sold. Let's think about what your goals are for your future.
Help them with some education of long-term. Mm-hmm. It's awesome.
Yeah, I like that. I think a lot of people, like you said, they just get into it. They get excited. They think, oh, I can buy a house. And then all of a sudden they're buying a house like the next couple of weeks, right? Yeah. And so, but if they can just think of it, I think someone had said, in fact, in one of our last podcasts, somebody said, emotion is going to be in this because emotion is a big part of buying a house. It's a big deal, right? I mean, it's your home. It's where you're going to live. There's a lot of emotions with it. And even selling a home, there's a lot of emotions. As long as we're not making decisions on the emotions. Because you're going to have emotion in buying a house no matter what, right? I mean, it just is. You're going to fall in love with a house or what have you. But as long as you're not making a decision only based on emotions, if the logic of it lines up with the emotion, fantastic. That's awesome. But we can't be. It's hard to kind of pull that away, and so many people do just base it on emotion. Like you said, they love that house, but they hate the neighborhood. But they love the house so much, and they're so tied up to the house, they buy it, and then a year later they're calling us saying, "Yeah, this neighborhood's terrible. I want to move out." Yeah. So I think that's a big part of it.
When you're saying that, what it makes me think of, and we're talking about the right agent, it made me think of a little bit too of why I choose an agent that's experienced. One, because if they have, I don't want to say several, but if they have plenty transactions going, they're not trying to push you into something just because they need to check.
Yeah.
They're going to find out what's the best interest for you. And so they'll give you the education of, maybe you don't need this big of a house. You don't need 5 bedrooms unless you really want it when you only have 1 or 2 kiddos. We should look at it this way or look at it that way. Instead of trying to push things through, somebody who's not, I guess, married to the transaction just to get the transaction, but more of the process and the relationship of their client.
Agreed.
Yeah. I think focused on as we starting with a lender, right? I think a lot of the questions that we get asked are kind of like, what credit score do I need? What will my monthly payment be? Are there first-time homebuyer programs or grants? I mean, all these questions. How much do I need as a down payment? Should I lock my rate? All those kind of things. that's why I think a lot of agents, real estate agents, sometimes will take that on and try to answer all those questions. But I think really we need to let the real estate agents stay in their lane of finding you the right place and making that good decision on the right home, but then let the lender really go through thoroughly what their options are. And a good lender will do that, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's good for agents to know some of the programs and that, maybe things to ask, but a good lender is going to go through that with them and really lay it all out so they can make a good decision.
It's a disservice for us to counsel them on what their loan would be and then have them actually go in, and it's completely different than what you thought it might be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we can give them ballparks and that, but I think so many agents, they feel like, hey, my clients just did this, so you do it too. And it's like, well, maybe not. That might not work for them. And
or sometimes you give them that advice, and then they're going to go talk to a lender, and the lender is going to be, trying to debunk all of these things that you've told them. And they're going to say, well, that's not true, or that's not true. And so it's important that, I guess, that you stay in your lane of expertise.
Well, just as we've had lenders want to kind of take a deal, right, and tell the agent how to do their job kind of thing. And as much as we don't like that because they only have a small portion of the information, same thing, right?
Right.
If we're jumping into their lane, then we only have a small portion of what they really need. And so I think that's just important, is make sure that when you're teaming up with a professional agent and a professional lender, is huge. So a couple questions on process and timing. So how long does the buying process take? What are the steps from offer to close? How competitive is the market right now? Who wants to take some of those?
I'll jump in real quick. As far as how competitive the market is right now, I think honestly right now for first-time home buyers is an absolutely prime time.
Okay.
Right now, we've seen housing prices drop a little bit over the course of this year. We've seen the market soften a little bit. We're starting to see sellers pay a little bit more of your closing costs, which means less out of pocket as a first-time home buyer, which is huge. Most first-time home buyers barely have enough for the down payment. So having the seller being willing to pay some of those additional costs for you is huge.
So how much is a typical, can people expect to pay in just closing costs? Not the down payment. The down payment, 3-5%, depending on loan type and that, but the closing costs, how much can they expect to pay?
So usually it's going to be around 2 to 3% of closing costs. And those are the costs for it's title fees, it's the loan and origination fees, the fees that it costs to be able to start up the loan. And these are all going to be separated out from your down payment and additional money that you will need to have for closing.
Again, working with an educated agent, we can give you estimates on that. So I think that's important that they know that up front. Nothing's worse than having surprises at closing and you're coming up with way more money than you anticipated.
And an agent that's actually communicating with your lender, right? Mm-hmm. So they know going in where they need to be.
And two, with that being said, that sellers are being willing to pay those a little bit more often, and we've seen housing prices drop down. We've also seen rates come down significantly over the last year. Which puts the market in a really good spot. Obviously we're not in the 2-3% interest rates that we saw a few years ago. However, if you can get into a house at a low price, since it's dropped a little bit, as soon as rates start to go up again or drop again, those housing prices are going to go up. And so you can kind of lock in at your price, gain that equity as home values rise over the next couple of years, and then you can always refinance. You can refinance at a lower monthly payment, and it can be kind of a win-win situation.
I don't think people realize that, and even if they realize it, I don't think they really realize that that you can refinance, and that you're not married to that for 30 years.
Yeah,
and so that's the good news, right? It's so that you can get into it, and there's really worst case scenario is the rate stays the same, right? Best case scenario is in a year or 5 or 7, the rates drop a little bit, and then you can sit with your agent or your lender and say, if I refinance, is this worth it? Because there's going to be closing costs and there's going to be those things, and so it may not be worth it after the first 2 years, or depending on what it is. And so, but I don't think people realize that is like the interest rate is what it is now, and it's going to change, and you can manipulate that down the road. And so
And one thing too that I've explained to a lot of my friends that I think a lot, like my generation definitely does not understand, is the opportunity cost or the equity that you lose out on by waiting. Because if you're waiting for rates to drop, who knows how long you're going to wait for, right? We could be waiting for 1 year. We could be waiting for 5 years. During that time, you're losing out on additional equity that you could have had. So if you're waiting for those rates to drop and save you an extra $300 a month on your monthly payment, you might have lost out on 50 grand in equity over the 3 to 4 years that you were waiting for those rates to drop.
Right.
So I think that's just one other thing that a lot of first-time home buyers don't think about, and where it comes into play. Before we were kind of talking about not dating the rate.
Yeah.
And so marry the house and date the rate. And I think that just kind of comes around and comes into play with that.
A lot of people hate that, but I also agree with that. I feel like if you can prepare yourself and you find something that fits your payment and that you're comfortable in, the good news is down the road, all else fails, you're going to be able to get a better rate. Worst case scenario, stays the same or it goes up, but then you'd be glad that you're locked in. And I like what you say year after year but there's a lot of tax benefits that you lose out on. There's all sorts of things year by year that you lose out on, and I know a lot of people, you talk about liabilities and assets and that buying a home is a liability, right? And so I think it's that in a car is a pretty big necessity for a liability, and you need those two things. I think when you overextend of what you really do need, then that becomes like kind of maybe a double whammy of a liability. But if people can get into that and see what it is, all of the perks and all of the benefits of having these year after year, like Dave Ramsey says, you get to control your biggest monthly payment, which should be your home. And so you get to control that for the most part. So, and
I like what you said too, is just that you got to be comfortable in that to start with, right? You can't go into it as like, this is really a stretch, but those interest rates are going to come down.
Right.
Don't necessarily plan on that because we don't know.
Right.
Nobody really knows, right? And so you want to be comfortable where you're at. And if they come down, that's a bonus. If they go up, then you're glad you're in where you're at, right? And so there's no reason to really wait. So awesome. Well, how about process and timing? So take us through the process. Anyone want to take us through the process of kind of start to finish buying a home?
I think this is a great question for summer. It's got summer written on it.
Oh, does it? Okay. Well, I think, all of these questions, again, I'm going to say it again, hire a fantastic agent that has experience, because having that first-time home buyer, sit-down seminar, whatever you want to call it, to sit down and go through step-by-step what it's going to look like, I think that helps a lot too in the planning. But when you go to talk to the lender, and a lot of people are so intimidated by the process, which understandably so, it's a really big deal. Like you said, it's the biggest thing that you're going to have, that in your car. So as far as processes, my process that I like to take my first-time home buyers through is let's talk to a lender, let's see what that looks like, and then let's start looking at homes and really narrowing down what it is you're looking for once you're pre-approved, and we can kind of gauge what you can afford and what you're comfortable with. So that's another really important conversation I love to have, is even though you may be approved for a certain amount, that doesn't mean you should necessarily take that full amount and buy to the top of your budget, because
that's huge right there.
Yeah. And and it's hard not to, especially when you look at something in that budget and then or at that top, and then you kind of go down to the mid or low, and it's like,
Yeah.
But it's not always the best thing for you and your family and whatever else. So that's an important conversation that I like to have in the process too. And then once we can kind of narrow down specifically what we're looking for, then we start going over contracts and what that all looks like. And luckily, especially with our team, we've got us and we've got Brooke and we've got title. After that point, we make it as easy as possible for everybody else. But I mean, that's really quick overview of the process.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And there's different things in place, right? There's appraisals, there's inspections, things like that to make sure to get the best view we can. It's never going to be perfect. There's no home that's perfect out there. There's always homes that have little quirks and things like that. And so, but we want to make sure we're trying to protect ourselves the best we can in that. I like it.
And it's nice to get these appraisals, right? Sometimes they drive us nuts as agents because sometimes there's these discrepancies every once in a while that, are frustrating. But what's nice for appraisals for your client is they can have the peace of mind knowing that they're not going to overpay. Mm-hmm. The bank is willing to give you money on that because they feel like it's of value. Or the bank is not going to give you money of that because it didn't appraise for enough. And that, I think, is pretty awesome. So, in the years of selling real estate, people will ask, well, do you think I'm paying too much for it? And I'm like, well, I'm sure it's going to appraise. So, you're going to get market value. Everybody wants a steal. And sometimes just getting the steal is buying now and in 5 years realizing that you actually got a really good deal on that house. Yep. And so I think that that's pretty important on appraisals is that they are a good thing for your client because they help you. An inspection report is a good thing because you're getting, that Carfax, so to speak, for that house. So you kind of have the value, you have the condition, and you're able to, have a pretty good feel of what that house is all about.
I like that. I like that. Okay, so offers and contracts. A lot of the questions that come up are, what happens if I need to back out? Or what happens, or what can I ask the seller consent? What can they pay for exactly? Those kind of things. Who wants to take one of those?
And so I think this kind of comes back to having a good agent, having an agent that understands the contracts, that understands the forms. That way they can fully educate you as the buyer on what you can, what you can't do when you're absolutely locked in, when you can't back out, and kind of what are the repercussions if you do decide that you need to back out, right? And so there are different steps and phases throughout the home buying process where you can go ahead and make those types of decisions, right? So like obviously the inspection, that's kind of one of the first things out of the gate. We always recommend having an inspection, right? Where someone comes in, they do a general assessment of the home, check out the condition, make sure that everything is functioning properly, and they're looking for any of those major issues that are going to cost you a lot of money out of pocket right away, right? There's always going to be things wrong with the home, right? But we're looking for those big ticket items. And so if there is something that comes back on that inspection, then obviously you as a buyer, you've got an option. You can ask for the seller to kind of cover those costs. You can ask for the seller to go ahead and get that done and fix that prior to closing. Or if it's too big and the sellers aren't willing to go ahead and take care of it, then you can go ahead and walk away from the deal. And so there's different things in there that are there to kind of protect the buyer, as well as like a financing with their financing, right? There's the financing contingency where if for whatever reason something happens and they're not able to get financed at the last minute, then the buyers are protected by that to be able to back out if they have to. But a lot of agents, I think, they don't really know the contracts super well, unfortunately. And so it really helps when you've got an agent that is aware of those deadlines, and where I know Summer brought up having Brooke, our transaction coordinator on our team, where she's a huge help because she's just another person there making sure that nothing is going to be slipping through the cracks, that we're meeting all of our deadlines, and that our client's going to be protected throughout that whole process.
Awesome. I got a little quick story about that. So there was, had a client on the selling side. Buyer came, their agent was a friend of theirs, had been an agent for a long time, just doesn't do a lot of transactions. And so they put an offer in, got accepted, went through the inspection period, and a few things fell through or something happened on their end, and they were backing out in the inspection period. So typically earnest money, which earnest money, of course, for first-time home buyers, that's just money you put in, skin in the game, usually anywhere. In this area, it's a little bit lower than areas around us, but usually anywhere from $1,000 to $5,000, somewhere in there on a home. And so they had put a few $1,000s in, and they're like, okay, we got to terminate. And so I went back to my client and said, and they sent us a termination wanting their earnest money back. I kind of went back to my client, the seller, and said, hey, this is kind of where they're at. They're in the right. They typically get their earnest money back. And my client, we represent them, right? And so my client said, well, let's just try. Let's just try to get their earnest money. because it had been a little bit of time. They had a little bit longer due diligence or inspection period. And so we just filled out a different one and sent it back to the agent, having the earnest money going to the seller. And within 20 minutes, I had it back signed. So I don't know if there was this lack of communication with them and if they had a TC doing it or what that was, or if the agent just didn't even look at it. They just saw it come across. They said, oh yeah, go ahead and have my client sign this and send it over. But of course, earnest money, there's in the contract kind of where it goes. But if they sign a termination agreeing where it goes, then it goes to that person. It doesn't matter what the contract says at that point. And so the seller ended up getting a few $1,000s that they weren't expecting. And the buyer lost out on a few $1,000s only because their agent didn't know what they were doing. And guaranteed, I don't remember what agent it was, and we're not getting into that, but guaranteed that agent probably blamed us. Oh yeah, just they're not being good about this or whatever. But we were just I just did what they asked. I didn't say, hey, we deserve it or anything like that. I just said, hey, this is what my seller wanted me to send this over. Are they willing to sign it? Is all I said. And if they would have said, no, we get it, then my seller probably would have been like, yeah, I get it. Let's go forward. But at that point, because they didn't hire a good agent, they just hired a friend who just does it kind of part-time. They didn't catch that, and it cost them a few $1,000s.
Right.
So
what I like about this and what you were saying too, Max, is these contracts, I feel like a lot of times is, if sellers always say it's for the buyers, right? But I do like it but the seller knows their home and the buyer doesn't know this home. They just know that they like it. And what I like about these contracts is there's different periods and checkpoints of it's so that they understand everything that's coming to them about this house, right? To an extent. And so it's a full transparent deal. And so when I have had clients, wanting to walk away after these time frames, I'm like, well, this contract is to help you understand everything about the house. Everything on the house, all these boxes are checked. However, it doesn't, cover cold feet. It doesn't cover, emotional, and that's what's nice about these contracts and less scary from a first-time home buyer is because it does help you. There's plenty of opportunities that you get the inspection report back and you're like, I don't know. I don't like this. Well, there's your opportunity. Or if you're like, this is not so bad, then you're able to build more confidence in that, that real estate that you're purchasing. So.
I always try to prepare buyers, especially first-time home buyers, before we do the inspection and just say, this is going to be our secondary negotiation. We negotiated to get the home under contract. Mm-hmm. Now we're going to do an inspection. We're going to negotiate one more time on what the house needs. And I think that kind of helps put them in the right mindset where they're not like, oh my gosh, everything's wrong with the house. So it's like, no, we're going to negotiate on what we need, on what the house needs, obviously within reason. And I try really hard not to terminate unless there's something massively wrong with the house or you can't come to an agreement.
Especially when they've seen a bunch of homes and this is the one they wanted, right? And so sometimes they can just give up on that so quickly when a lot of times they're minor issues where inspectors do a pretty good job,
right?
And they have to list everything, but sometimes those reports get 50, 60, 70 pages long. That can be pretty overwhelming for a first-time home buyer, right?
And so we're always looking for what I tell them is structural. We want to make sure that the house is sound, that the house is, safety. We want to make sure that you're going to be safe. And then like what you said, Max, the big ticket items, a window that's broken in the garage isn't really going to make or break, but you don't want to really repair that or pay for that. So, you go that direction but I think that those are, something awesome to, prep your clients on is because they don't really know, and they get this 56-page report, and they want it to be brand new, and so you have to tell them you are going to have, you're a homeowner now. Yeah. You are going to have some weekend projects. You are going to, have some things like that, and
that's a good thing.
Yeah, and that report's perfect for it because then you can just keep it, and everything that you didn't get fixed, it's like, hey, you have a to-do list to eventually go through and just kind of go through and knock off all these items.
Yeah, and I think as a first-time homebuyer, like when we first bought our house, I was super overwhelmed by how many pages that inspection report was, right? And if you've never owned a home before, a lot of those projects and little things you're not really aware. It's a lot of things that you don't even think about. And so for us, when we got ours, I think I was so focused on some of the other smaller things that I missed a couple of really big things, where I ended up having to like pay for a roof within 6 months of moving in because our roof was leaking. And so I think it's good surrounding yourself with those people who can kind of coach you through that and be like, you know what, these things you probably don't need to worry about, but this is something that we should probably get looked at a little bit further and more in depth than just an inspector. Let's have a roof guy come out here and check out this roof. And so that's something that I always go back and think on when I'm working with my clients and first-time home buyers, is I just think of my 23-year-old self being so stoked and emotional and buying this house, and then being, getting pissed because I'm having to shell out on a brand new roof like 6 months in. Yeah. And so they're all things that are there to be considered, and we're here to try and help you and guide you through that process of what's important, what's maybe not as important.
And definitely ask for that advice, right? Like the inspection report comes back, you're not sure what you're looking at, and you're like for me, like say I take my car to the shop and it comes back with a whole list of things. I'm definitely, when it comes to mechanics, not the guy, but I'll ask a friend or I'll ask them, what is really important that I need to be looking at here? And breaking a few things down. And definitely you don't want to fix everything every time you go get an oil changed. But I mean, there could be some major things, as far as the house aspect. I mean, a roof, and you get focusing on a couple of, outlet covers, or I'm not sure what it was. Maybe it was a working microwave or whatever. And you're like, I want this stuff fixed. And your agent was probably like, it's kind of weird that he wants that stuff, but not the roof. And so, but it is good to ask those questions and to, I guess, pay attention to that. And your real estate agent, again, I feel like if they're busy enough and have enough volume and transactions, they're not going to be chasing the deal. They're going to want to make sure that you are set up, because that last guest that we had, he was talking about, we don't make all of our money on one transaction and retire. We make little bits of our income on every single transaction. And we want that relationship so that we can have that repeat business and that referral business. And a lot of agents, unfortunately, just take it transaction by transaction.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes a big difference. I mean, you see that in any sales job, right? The ones who are doing well, it's okay if somebody backs away and doesn't buy it, right? And that's okay. We want to make that best decision for our clients as well. And sometimes, like Summer said, if it's the house they want and it's in the neighborhood they want and it's exactly what they need, and there's just a couple little things they need to kind of get through to make that happen, that sometimes is the best thing. But other times it's not. Other times it's like, well, this one will work. So they kind of go forward and kind of move forward. And then it's like, well, then there's this and this, and it starts tacking up. And it's maybe the right decision for the client is to back out of that. And so we need to be kind of the voice of reason, or kind of bring people down. It's like, hey, maybe this is the chance. I know you don't really want to back out, but maybe this is time to think about that, especially if the seller is not willing to work with you on that. And every seller is different. You say that, okay, this agent's pretty good to work with, or not agent good to work with, but it really comes down to what the seller is willing to do. And so, and some of that varies per agent that you're working with on the other side, for sure, because a lot of agents explain things better than others, right? But some of the things that, they don't need to be worried about in moving forward if it's the perfect house. But at the same time, occasionally it's a good thing for them to back out and find a house that's right for them.
I agree.
So what are some of the things we've talked about? Some of the questions. Are there other questions that come to mind that you get asked quite a lot with first-time home buyers, or even buyers that have been around the block a few times? This might be their third or fourth home.
I don't know if you have any, Summer, but one that comes to mind just initially, like especially with my, I guess, a generation and a lot of my peers and my age group, is the question of, is it really worth it to go ahead and buy a home. And I think Morgan is an awesome one to speak to on this, because Morgan has been able to invest a lot in real estate and do a lot of different things. And I think I'd love to hear, obviously, your opinion. Obviously, we've had conversations outside of this about that, but I think it'd be super helpful for people to be able to hear thoughts when they can rent, an apartment or a townhome for $1,500 a month, save money. Whereas if they're going to go buy that townhome, they're now paying $2,000 a month for that townhome.
So a lot of it is we want that instant gratification, right? Like we want to make sure that when we get into it, that it's the right deal. And sometimes, real estate is a slow growing, equity producing, transaction.
It's
or
not Bitcoin
investment. Correct. And so when they ask everybody wants that immediate gratification maybe. And so what's interesting, also everybody wants a good deal. So I always compare, it's like has nothing to do with it, but you go on a trip with somebody and you're like, hey, let's all go to Vegas. How much are flights? $300. Yeah, okay. Let us think about it, right? And so then they think about it, and then 10 days later we're like, hey, did you book your tickets? No. And they get online and they're like, well, shoot, now they're $550. I just don't want to go. And so we get into this mindset where real estate, I feel like, is similar, and everybody wants the good deal, or they want an excuse of why not to do it. And we all want the excuse of why not to be an adult, maybe, and maybe not have that responsibility of it. And so it's like, well, it's the interest rates. Well, when the interest rates were at 3%, it wasn't the interest rates, it was something different. And so then now that shifts, and so then we all have an excuse. So is it important to buy now? Absolutely. Absolutely, because we look at the trends, and Jason pulls up the stats, and you look at the trends, values just go up and up and up and up. And people talk about 20 years ago, I bought a house for this, and it's like you can't build this house half the size for that same price.
Yeah.
And costs just go up, just like our trucks or our vehicles, they're constantly going up. And so that is why I tell people, yes, and don't buy an expensive home. You don't have to compete with your parents. You're just buy something that you can afford and get into and feel comfortable. Don't be mortgage broke. Don't be married, to this mortgage that then it upsets the rest of your lifestyle. Just get something affordable that it becomes just like a utility that you use, or that, that payment comes in each month, and just like you pay your cell phone bill. And so that's, that would be my advice. It's funny how we don't want to buy a home that we can live in, but we'll buy a vehicle or two, for almost nowadays is a third, or, it can be, they're expensive. And so that's what, I think that's the whole thing. I could go on for days about that, and there's the difference between assets and liabilities. And if you're used to buying liabilities, and that's fun, wait until you start buying assets and 5 years from now and looking back and being like, wow, this is incredible. We've all bought real estate, whether it's our our personal home, and looked back and been like, this is pretty solid. I don't really want to leave now or I don't want to sell this because it just keeps going up and up and up.
Well, in most 5-year spans, even if someone was so disciplined, and let's say that discrepancy that you mentioned, that $500 a month or whatever, or $400 a month is, between renting that very similar unit to buying right now. If someone was very disciplined and actually stashed that away, most likely in 5 years, you're still going to be ahead by the equity in the home that you purchased. That makes sense. But the problem is nobody saves it. Everybody buys a little bit nicer car, the little bit better whatever, and that kind of stuff. And so then you're even in a worse spot. You're in the same position you were 5 years ago, instead of having some equity to roll into something bigger and better. Yeah. And so that's where I think a lot of first-time home buyers, they want to get that perfect house right off the bat. It's not the case. Usually you buy one, grow a little bit of equity, buy another one, get a little bit of equity, buy kind of your forever home or whatever.
And I think it's something that you plan around, right?
Yeah.
So exactly what you're saying. I mean, it's that $500 and they're like, oh, this is what we're going to do. But nobody does. They have that trip or that wedding that comes up that then they got to spend their nest egg on, or something happens and another child comes. However, if you buy that home, everything else just kind of goes around it, like that rock in the river. And so everything still works out. You're still going to have enough money to go on trips. You're still going to be able to go to that wedding.
You might stay at the Hampton Inn instead of the Ritz, but it's okay.
But
you're still there.
In 5 years, you have something for it.
Yeah.
And so
it makes me think, I can't remember who it was, but there was another guest that you guys had on your podcast within the last couple of months, but he was talking about that lifestyle creep, of how as you get older, it gets harder to go back and take a few steps back in your lifestyle. And so I think a lot of people, especially like a lot of people in my sphere of influence, they think, oh, it's going to be easier to own a home when I'm 30, or when we're 40, we're more established. We've got more things. I don't think that's the case. I mean, obviously I'm still young, but everything that I've heard and everything that I've heard you guys talk about and just seeing with what you guys have been able to do, at points where that's not the case. It's harder to take that step back, because when you do get to that age, you've already spent that money. Those things are already in liabilities. Most of the time they've lost their value completely. And so I think that's just one really important thing to consider, is that by buying a house now, maybe making those sacrifices and dialing back on some of that disposable income that you spend on just random things, that it's just going to bless your life that much further 5, 10, 15 years down the road. And heck, when you're 30 years down the road and your house is paid off, you're going to be pretty happy that you did it.
So it's that tree that you plant.
Yeah.
And 16 years ago, my wife and I built a house that we couldn't afford, which I wouldn't recommend. However, we stuck with it. And now 16 years later, I mean, you owe very small on it and your payments very little on it. And so like what you're saying, you think it's easier. Well, life gets more complicated the older you get, and then adding something that doesn't have to be as much money on top of that, that you could have had, this equity, especially if you're asking all these questions and trying to talk yourself out of it. That's why real estate is also great, is because this equity is like a bank account that compounds a little bit of interest each year, and it's harder to access it. You can't just go withdraw it. You can do these other lines of credit or whatever, but it's harder to do that. And so that's the nice thing too, is you can kind of control that payment as long as you have it.
Yeah. I do not envy your generation trying to get into their first home. Like it's really hard watching first time home buyers for me now, because it seems so much more difficult for them today than it was for me when I bought my first home. And I tell every single first time home buyer, I'm like, I'm so proud of you. That was really hard. Like, our cost of living is extremely high. This is really difficult. Prices are really high. I mean, it's really tough to do. So like Morgan said, if you can afford it, you absolutely should. And you should do it as quickly as possible.
Yeah. Well, and even in that scenario, like if we play it out 5-10 years of renting versus buying, in 10 years, that rent's going to be $2,200-$2,500.
Yeah.
But if you bought, you're still at $2,000.
Yeah.
So then all of a sudden it's flipped, and now you're saving money on the buy side because you bought. So it's just, I know it seems hard and it seems difficult and a little bit of a sacrifice in the beginning, but I've never heard anybody say, oh, I wish I would have waited 5 years to buy that house.
Yeah.
Ever.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Or I'm glad that I bought this truck instead of a house.
Yeah.
Exactly. I wish I wouldn't have bought this house, and I would have bought a pickup 16 years ago. And like what you're saying, Summer, and what you said, Jason, it is a sacrifice, and it's getting more and more and more of a sacrifice. I think it's getting harder and harder, but yet not impossible. Yeah. You're going to have to give up some things, and you're going to have to really set that goal and work towards that goal. And I definitely think it's worth it. And then once you get one, then you can get the second one, and then you can sit and build upon that, and you have equity, and then you can get some momentum if you wanted to grow a real estate portfolio, or if you didn't want to, at least you have something that is a policy, you could sort of speak, that is growing year after year, that it's just a safe haven for your family.
It makes you feel like you have options financially. Like
Absolutely.
you can look at what you have in real estate and you're like, okay, I could do this with this money. I could do this with this. And, at the phase of life I'm in now, I really appreciate that. I appreciate looking at that and saying, okay, I have options. And that's a big, breath of air.
I love that.
Like, we're going to be okay.
It's true.
Yeah. And I think when you're saying that it's harder and harder, I think that it is, but I think you got to be more careful with your choices. Mm-hmm. So if you're moving to a place that the price of living is high, we always used to talk about that with California or Hawaii, but now we're kind of in
Idaho's one of those.
Yeah.
Right? We're in the top 11 or 12.
So you got to be careful with that. You got to know, okay, if I'm going to relocate there, now what's my payment going to be? What can I purchase? What can I, you have to make smarter choices, but it is going to be okay. And I do think we gain a lot of wisdom from that, instead of just going willy-nilly of what we were able to do and just say, it's not that big of a deal. I'll just go sign up for that. It's cheaper than rent, right? We used to hear that advertisement all the time. Mm-hmm. And so you don't really get that. It's still doable. It's still possible. It's not impossible. You just got to be disciplined, and you got to, make some smart choices for it.
And I think that's why you said you tell your clients that you're so proud of them for buying that house, right? I think part of it is based on just numbers, based on what people make versus what home prices are now. It's not more difficult. There was just an article I read just recently. It basically shows it's not more difficult to get into a home now than it was in the 60s and 70s. Right. The only difference is we have so many more options, and people spend their money in so many other places. Yes. And social media has driven this level of their lifestyle is just so much higher than it was then, and people want that lifestyle. So when you roll in the lifestyle with it, it makes it very hard to get into a home. But your clients have made that decision that at least they're dealing back some of their lifestyle a little bit so that they can afford a home, and that's a huge decision, right? It's huge. I mean, people, I know so many young people that have said, "Hey, I can't get into a home." But they drive 2 brand new cars. They go on a vacation every quarter. They do all this. And it's like, dude, my parents never did that. They never went on a vacation. They never bought new cars. Because they couldn't. They wanted a house. You know what I mean? And so I think it's just that lifestyle, and that is so imbalanced right now that people just want the better and the better and the better. And
they won't sacrifice now for later.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's
too. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, me personally, I didn't own a new car or have my truck payment, and it was paid off in my 20s, but I drove it until I was 32. And my truck payment was $185 a month. It was, paid off when I was 26. I had 6 years without, a payment. Now, if I would have had a BMW payment and different things then, I wouldn't have been able to afford my home. And that was one of the reasons why I could afford my home that I couldn't afford to build, was because we didn't have the vehicles that sabotage that. And so what you're saying, I agree with that 1,000%.
Or eating out, or just basic, all those things combine to making it, I can't ever get into a home. But if they just kind of took a back and look at their finances, they probably could. But it would take a little bit of a sacrifice.
And that's where I think I have friends that are like, man, it's just so tight right now. It's so tight right now. And I've thought about that, and I thought it is because what are we spending our money? And I don't know if it's the same guest on the podcast, but he said, when you taste luxury, it becomes a necessity.
Yeah. Same guy. Yeah.
And so when you do that, you do think that you need all these extra things because that's the way you live. And you're like, well, I'm not going to, shrink my world or shrink my life, when really it's actually probably what we all need to do. Go on a financial diet and just shrink everything.
So true.
And so so my friends that say this, or clients that say this, you would never ask them because you would offend them, but it makes you wonder, do you have a budget that you go off of? Because I guarantee it that they don't. And what does that budget look like? Because I guarantee it's not, 30% should be eating out or, on entertainment. And so anyway, I love that you said that because I agree with that 100%. And I think that it is true. It is harder. There is, our market now is higher compared to the rest of the country. I mean, there's some facts there. However, I do think that when it goes up, and then we have to shift and pivot and know, I can't be doing that. I can't be shopping as much. I can't be, whatever it is. And I do agree that social media that's why stores are closing down in our malls, because online shopping is so big, because you just get that dopamine and that immediate gratification. Anyway, that's a rabbit hole for
just if we lived like they lived then, everybody could afford a house.
Yep.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people too, like you said earlier, Morgan, I think a lot of people like to try and make excuses for why they can't buy a house. And especially those who may be a little bit more financially savvy, or maybe wanting to start to invest and put away for retirement, because usually first-time home buyers are starting to think about that. They're starting to think about retiring and retirement in the future and having a nest egg. And they look at that and say, well, what if I save that extra $500 a month by renting and just put that in the stock market? I can go make 10, 12% of my money there. But I think one key thing that they're missing out on is, even though homes are only appreciating at, say, 3 to 5% a year, that's kind of what our region is predicted to appreciate over the next 5 years. You're not only just making or gaining appreciation on your down payment. Let's say your down payment's $10,000. You're gaining appreciation on the bank's money,
on the purchase.
So
price.
if you buy a house for $300,000, you're getting that appreciation for the entire house value, even though you only put $10,000 in, versus if you put $10,000 into the stock market, you're only making it on that $10,000. And so I think that's one key thing for first-time home buyers to understand, is that it really is an investment if you're smart about it. If you don't go buy the biggest, nicest house right away, but you buy something that's within your budget, within your means, you kind of lean up financially a little bit there and make some sacrifices, then it can be one of your greatest investments.
So back to the beginning, you ask, when my generation or my friends ask me, is it worth it? I do think Jason's always great with questions, and you just ask, well, depends. What's your goal? Do you want to be a free bird and just backpack, in Europe and, in Central America, or what? Like, what is your goal?
Like something you do, Morgan.
You just waiting for your inheritance to come through?
Yeah. And if that's what it is, then buying a home probably is not. But anybody who, when you're talking about this, Max, it makes me think of anybody who has any financial sense or financial responsibilities at all purchase a home. There's not really anybody who's like, I didn't buy a home and, look like I cheated the system and this is what I did with it. And so that's what, it does take a little bit. And it's like, well, do you want to build a portfolio? Do you want to have an asset? Or do you want more liabilities? Like, what is your goal? And something that's really good, we all know this, but something that's really good in your life is always going to take the most amount of work. Something that maybe isn't as good is going to be the easier thing to own or buy or finance and things like that. The food we eat, the easiest, cheapest, fastest food we can get is not the best for us. And so, you've got to kind of decide.
There's not a weekly shop for your budget.
Right. Right. And so
what would you guys both have kids? So, they're a little ways away from buying a home, 14 years old.
Yeah.
But so what would you, I guess, what do you start telling them in their teens so that they can kind of be a little bit more, I guess, savvy and in a better position as they get older?
I've actually already started having those conversations with my oldest, because I have so many regrets about what I didn't do in my 20s. I was 19, 20 when I bought my first home, and I sold it fairly quickly because I was moving to Pocatello to finish school. And so when I started selling real estate, I had listed a house just a couple doors down that was a very similar floor plan. And I bought the house originally for $100,000, and I listed the house a few doors down for $430,000. Wow. And I just sat there and looked at it, and I was like, gosh, dang,
I lost out on $300,000.
Why did I not even, it wasn't even a thought. It wasn't ever anything I considered to just put a renter in it. Because, you know, the mortgage wasn't huge. It would have been totally doable while I was in Pocatello going to school, and I could have moved back in it eventually. I never even thought about it.
Would have easily covered the mortgage at that point.
Oh, absolutely.
The rent.
Yeah. And so I have, that is always just like lived rent free in my brain, because I'm like, dang it, if I would have known, you know. And then there's other homes that I had owned, and just, I never thought of keeping them ever. I just never considered it. I didn't have anyone counseling me on that until I met you guys. So I do have those conversations with my oldest now, and I'll have them with my daughter too. Like, let's look at this as an investment, and what are your goals here? And I'd love to be in a position to financially to help them with their first one, and you know, get that going for them. So
that's awesome. How about you, Max?
I think the biggest thing, just kind of going back to what we talked about earlier, was just being able to budget and limit that lifestyle creep, and be able to be happy and content with what you have. Because I feel like delayed gratification is something that is kind of losing. It's not as common anymore.
Yeah.
Everybody wants everything now. They're scrolling on Instagram and see something cool, and they just go and buy it. I've done it. I still do it. It just
we
kind
all
of
do
happens.
it.
But I think having that conversation of doing that, because then it's gonna come back and help them when they go back to buy their first home.
Yeah.
And understanding of how that works, because then they're not necessarily going to go want to buy the biggest, best home, but they're going to be able to understand that key principle where they can kind of hold back. And then obviously it'd be awesome to be able to help them to get into that and kind of build their portfolio into something that's going to be able to make them money. So then later in their life, they can go ahead and go on the vacations and enjoy some of the luxuries and other things that you can get with that.
And I mean, my teenager son, I talk to him a lot about just start good habits. You know, like he hates schoolwork. I hated schoolwork. And he's like, well, you didn't do schoolwork. And I'm like, yeah, well, I learned down the road all these bad habits that I had to fix, and just create these habits that are good, and it will help you down the road to be able to function and make the smart decisions and live within your means, and buy things that make you money, and don't buy things, and try to just be disciplined and focus. Like, I know that those aren't going to serve me. I know that that's not going to be the best thing. And I know that I'm going to have to pick this over 10 other things that I have to say no. And you can buy really anything you want. You just can't buy everything you want. And so that's like, you just, for my son, that's what, I mean, I try to talk to him a lot about, is like, your schoolwork's important. You're probably never going to use some of this stuff again, but it's the fact that you're learning how to solve problems, you're exercising your brain, you're getting used to deadlines, you're getting used to these things, because I mean, those for me were hard things to learn as I got older, as I cruised through my high school and learned zero habits. And you got to have good habits, I think, as you're an adult, and real estate comes right in there, and you have to have good habits. You can't make your house payment late. You can't pay your taxes late. You can't, I mean, there's just so many things that you can't neglect, and real estate is a great, you know, it's just a great example of that.
Yeah, I love that.
And I think it's something not to be intimidated by either. Buying a house for the first time, I think, is super intimidating. But as a first-time home buyer, if you just know, okay, I just got to get to a good lender and I got to get to a good agent, then you really have nothing to worry about, because they're going to be able to guide you towards making the decisions that make the most sense for your situation.
Yeah.
And if you just know that, then I think you'll be set.
And I think if you make it a cool thing too, like owning your home is a cool thing.
Yeah.
Not owning your home is not as cool to me. You know, it may be okay for somebody, and there's instances where that's fine, but you know, owning 3 cars and parking them outside of an apartment, that isn't cool to me. And so I think you have to build that kind of standard of, like, what kind of standard do you want for when you're older? Do you want this sort of stuff? And if you do, this is what it's going to take to do it.
That reminds me of a job I once had a long time ago, right when I was pretty young, and I was doing valet parking down at a little club. It was a Greek club called Papillonston in Salt Lake City. And there was a few people, not all of them, but there was a few guys there that they were driving very nice cars, like Ferraris and Porsches and things like that. But they were going home to their parents' house, and they were like mid-30s. And I was like, huh. And even then I was like, I was pretty young. I was probably like 18. And I was like, yeah, that's probably not where I want to be when I'm 35.
Or parking them in a garage with uninsulated walls, when they post pictures of it. I'm like, what the hell?
Yeah.
And I mean, and you can buy those cars, or you can just buy more assets.
Yeah.
And that's what's awesome, right? And that's another lesson, is those folks who have a lot of money and are wealthy, they really don't look like they have a lot of money and that they're wealthy. You usually can't tell who they are and what they are. And when they drive a vehicle, it's like, 8 years old. And then those who look like they have a lot of money that, my kids think it's awesome. But then you're like, they don't really have a lot of money. On the shell, it's awesome, but on the inside, not so awesome.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it's a lot less stress when the shell is maybe not so awesome and not as flashy and simple. And in the inside, they have stability and they have, these different things.
Well, I think it's a lot of times you get into that cycle, right? So a lot of the times those people, it's not just the one car they bought. Because the one car, if they bought it, paid it off, drove it for 10 years like you did, great. I mean, even if it's a nice car, right?
Right.
But the problem is you get that want of the new, and it's never satisfied. And so then every 2 years, you're buying new. And then where are you 10 years later? Same place you were when you started, instead of just keeping and holding it. And I've had to learn that too, because I always wanted that new too for so long, right? And so I think if you can just it's so hard to have that discipline. You think, oh, if I could just have that. But then you get it and you're like, meh. It's like, okay. You know what I mean? Have you ever done that?
Oh, yeah.
Like there's something you wanted and you thought, oh, this is so cool. And then you get it. And like literally a week later, you're like, oh, it's okay.
Yeah. But then you have a new one.
Yeah. And then you want the new one and then the new one. And it's just never satisfied.
And so, a story with vehicles. When I got my first vehicle, my dad he had this old Hummer that he just like drove the brakes off it. And then when it blew up, it had like 360,000 miles on it.
Holy cow.
And he loved it. And then he contemplated of whether or not he should replace the motor in it. Like he loved it. And when I bought my new truck and I pulled up, and first of all, I knew what he was going to say. But second of all, he's like, it's funny that I'm a millionaire and I drive this and you're not, and you drive a brand new truck. And I mean, at the time I thought he was kind of an ass, but it's something that stuck in my head like every vehicle that we buy, every, things, like in that nature that I'm like, this isn't what smart people do. And when people, a vehicle or things like that, when people are like, oh man, that's so awesome. I'm like, yeah, well, it's not what smart people do. Like I wouldn't encourage you to do this. And so anyway.
Like that.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah.
Well, cool. So I think obviously with this get with a good agent and they can point you in the right direction of a great lender. And that's kind of a good place to start. Even if a year or 2 years out, just give us a call. We can kind of put you in that and get something kind of just a plan in place, And sometimes that plan happens. In fact, I would say most of the time that's happened when somebody's called and said, hey, I'd really like to get into a home within maybe a year or two.
Right.
I would say 70% of the time they're within like 6 months. Or sooner, it does sometimes happen sooner than you think, but at least that way you have a plan and something to work towards. But things can happen pretty quickly if you really want them to.
And I would also say in real estate, start small. If you're a first time home buyer,
it's not the perfect house. You don't need the perfect house.
Yeah, and we're not looking for that for you. We just want a starter home. There's a reason why it's called a starter home.
Yep.
For a reason.
Your first home was how big?
My first home I think it was like 800 square feet.
And it was like a manufactured home, right? If I remember right, you telling me?
So this one actually wasn't.
Okay.
This was like an abandoned home that was over by Rocky Mountain Middle School.
Okay, that's awesome.
Oh, it was hell. And but it was perfect.
Yeah.
My payment on it, and I got it financed, and it was way back when my payment was $210.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And it was awesome. And it was all I needed.
$210,
I didn't need anything. It was
That
a
is
nicer
awesome.
home than what my friends had.
Yeah.
And then I ended up selling it to my sister and kind of got raked over the coals on that. And then we did buy a manufactured home. Same thing though, is just slowly stepping up. And and that's what I say, like our home worked out best or good for us at the time. It still would have worked out fine if there would have been some other steps in there. And so luckily it worked out, but it easily could have not have been so good, and we definitely had some scares in that time of then like, man, we're way over our head.
Yeah.
Because then you got to furnish the damn thing, and then you got to pay to heat it, and then you got to pay to cool it, and then you got to pay for a yard. Like it just keeps going, and there's all these expenses when my little 800 square foot house didn't have any of that, So
That's me too. I mean, the house that I bought was in Draper, Utah, and it was 600 square feet. They marketed it as 1,200 square feet, but it had an unfinished basement. And so the livable space was 600 square feet. It was tiny, right? And we bought that. I think it was, I can't even remember. I think it was like 140 grand then, but that was in Draper, which was kind of going up. That was in like 97, I think. And so, yeah, I mean, you just start where you can, right? And you don't need huge right off the bat, especially. I think yours was what, 800 or something like that?
Yeah, ours was like 800 square feet and 2-bed, 1-bath.
Yeah.
Built 1918. It was awesome.
It was awesome.
Has a nice new roof on it now too.
That's right. But at the time, it was great.
At the time, it was perfect.
Yeah.
It was awesome. And honestly, too, your first house, and I don't think the situation needs to be perfect either, because you learn from it.
Yeah.
Like I can't tell you how many lessons me and my wife have learned from buying that dang house down there in Salt Lake, that we now are going to bless us the rest of our lives and be lessons that we teach to our kids. And it benefits me now too, because I'm in real estate, right? Those are lessons that I can pass on and share to my clients. And
so, even though you had to put in a new roof, you had to you sold a little bit earlier than expected, you still made a little bit of money on it.
Yeah.
Even covering the roof costs and factoring all those in.
Yeah, we kind of got lucky and timed the market just right as far as that goes. But I mean, that area appreciated really fast, and that can really happen anywhere. But I think those lessons they're super valuable, and they're things that'll be able to bless you like the rest of your life and along the rest of your financial journey as well.
When you talk about that, and my little 800 square foot home, you don't have to have a 2,500 square foot home or a way bigger home to feel proud about it or to feel excited about it.
True.
However, you do have to be into it in a situation of where you can pay for it so that you can allow the joy versus stress.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, you were happy there. You liked it. You're proud of your little home, and that's okay. And that's when you can be proud of it, and it's awesome, right? So many people feel like, well, this house is way bigger than mine. Well, those people are stressed out of their mind, and they're not happy, and there's not joy, and they're not proud of it. Yeah. They may think it is when people come in and out, to drop kids off or whatever it may be. But at the same time, when you can afford it, it's like the best blessing that you can have. And then knowing it goes up every single year, like it really is an incredible feeling.
Oh, absolutely.
I'll never forget when we had just built a home. We were pretty proud of it. We thought, okay, this is pretty cool. And then we'd met a neighbor. They're great people, but he had kind of looked up the hill, said, oh, see that big house up there? It's like, that's mine. And I was like, okay, that's good. And then I realized later on he'd been in it for about a year and a half, and they still didn't have cabinets because they had kind of run out of money. But they wanted the house. They had the big house on the hill, right? And it was like, he was pretty proud of it, but it wasn't even complete inside. And I was like, okay, something's wrong with this picture, right? I mean, how much happier would you be just in a modest home? I mean, really, at home, when you're at home hanging out with your family, whatever it is, eating dinner, playing games, watching a movie, whatever that might be, does it matter if your home is 10,000 square feet or 1,000 square feet? It really doesn't matter, right?
But you're having better conversations. You're having happier conversations. You're more relaxed. You're more present with your family. Like there's all these like lifestyle, lessons to learn out of it all. And that's where like what you're saying, like
nothing wrong with a big home, but it's just
if you can
somebody
afford
do it. Yeah, exactly. That's it right there.
And so just because you can pay for it doesn't mean you can afford it either. And I think that's what, I remember when I was in St. George, I wanted to buy this. It was just me. I was not married, and I wanted to buy this big house, and I thought it was going to be awesome. And my dad came, and we were looking at like my monthly payment and how much I made, and then he's like, "You'll have $1,200 extra a month." And I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "You got to buy food, you got to buy gas, you got to buy utilities, you got to pay for this stuff." And I was like, "Yeah, it'll be fine." And that's when he's like, "You're not going to be happy here when you have all those." So then we shifted gears, and I bought like I think it was 1,050. It was just over 1,000 square feet, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, tiny little home, and I had money left over, and I loved it. And I was happy, and I was able to come home, and I was able to have good conversations, and I wasn't strapped to this house.
Yeah.
And it was awesome. And so I think that the feelings, and that's a huge lesson to know is, I mean, it can be your home, it can be your vehicles, it can be your clothes with a credit card bill, like whatever it may be, keep small, stay small, simplify, keep it as simple as, don't have more than you need.
Love it.
Super solid.
Summer, anything you want to add?
I like it.
I like it.
I agree 100%. Simpler the better. That's how I like to live.
It's true. I know. So it's so easy to get it complicated, right? It's so easy to just go big. Mm-hmm. Especially when you see everything online or whatever, and it's like, oh, that's awesome. I want to do that, or I want to have that, or I want to. It's so easy just to get caught up in that, for sure. It's hard not to. Cool. Well, I love it. Thanks, guys. Cool. Appreciate you guys being on.
Of course.
It's been good. And you guys, obviously, for first-time home buyers, this is something that's huge. And all these little things come up, but that's why if you've got a good agent and a good lender, it makes life so much easier. So we'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.